The day the Korean Mafia boss's perfect love life cracked, his black ex and 3 children appeared at the park. The afternoon sun felt like an interrogation lamp across Ro-woon's shoulders as he walked beside Ji-hoon through the park, her manicured fingers resting on his arm with the weight of a signed contract. The engagement ring he'd placed on her hand 2 months ago glittered like surveillance cameras. Watching, recording, ensuring he played his part. Perfect heir. Perfect alliance. Perfect lie. The calligrapher wants to know if we're using traditional or modern characters for the invitations. Ji-hoon's voice floated through his awareness, elegant and efficient. And your father's secretary called again about seating the prosecutors near the family table. Ro-woon offered a practiced nod, his eyes scanning the park with the automatic calculation of a man who'd learned to identify threats before they materialized. Children chasing pigeons, elderly couples on benches, families laughing over shared meals, ordinary people living ordinary lives, a world he'd been trained to protect from the shadows while never belonging to it himself. Then he saw her. Everything stopped. His pulse thundered in his ears so violently, he thought Ji-hoon might feel it through his arm. There, beneath a jacaranda tree just 20 meters ahead, sat the woman who'd disappeared from his life 4 years ago, taking a piece of his humanity with her. Yemi Adekunle. Her skin glowed warm in the golden light, natural curls pulled into a loose puff, wearing a simple green dress and worn sneakers that somehow looked more regal than Ji-hoon's designer ensemble. But it wasn't Yemi that made Ro-woon's carefully constructed world crack down the center. It was the 3 children beside her. 3 children, maybe 4 years old, wearing matching yellow shirts, their legs swinging in perfect synchronization as they shared snacks from colorful wrappers. The boy on the left had Ro-woon's exact eyes, sharp, observant, cataloging the world with unsettling precision. The girl in the middle possessed his jawline, delicate but unmistakable. The smallest boy tilted his head with the identical gesture Ro-woon made when calculating odds. The math was simple, devastating, undeniable. Yemi's gaze lifted and found his across the impossible distance. Recognition struck her face like a physical blow. For one suspended heartbeat, neither moved. 2 people who'd once shared everything, now separated by years of silence, and 3 children who carried his features like genetic evidence. Then Yemi stood with practiced urgency, gathering the children with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. She didn't panic, didn't shout, simply took their small hands and walked away quickly, disappearing down the tree-lined path like smoke dissolving into memory. Ro-woon stood frozen as his world reordered itself around a single, crushing truth. Those children were his. Ro-woon. Ji-hoon's voice seemed to come from underwater. You've gone completely pale. Should we sit down? He had 3 children. 3 children who existed in the world without his protection, without his name, without his knowledge. The realization felt like a blade sliding between his ribs. I have to go, he said, already pulling out his phone, fingers moving with muscle memory. Go? But we have the meeting with the venue coordinator in 30 minutes. Something urgent came up. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, hollow, distant, belonging to someone else entirely. Ji-hoon's expression hardened, the first crack in her perfect composure. More urgent than planning our wedding? Yes, he thought. More urgent than a marriage built on family strategy rather than feeling. More urgent than maintaining an image that had just shattered like glass. I'll call you, he said, the promise already tasting like ash on his tongue. 20 minutes later, Ro-woon sat in the back of his car, his most trusted associate Min-joon sliding into the driver's seat with the silent efficiency of 8 years' partnership. The man had helped Ro-woon navigate impossible situations, but nothing like this. Find Yemi Adekunle, Ro-woon said quietly, each word carefully controlled. Last known address, current employment, financial situation, everything. And Min-joon, do it invisibly. No pressure, no surveillance that traces back to me. Min-joon's eyebrows rose fractionally, the most emotion the man ever displayed. The woman from 4 years ago? Yes. Ro-woon's jaw tightened. And Min-joon, she has 3 children. I need to know everything about them too. Ages, names, circumstances, everything. By dawn, Minjun had answers. They sat in Rowoon's study, the city lights sprawling below like a kingdom he no longer wanted, while Minjun read from his tablet with clinical precision. Yemi Adekunnal, single mother, runs a small online business, custom textiles and cultural educational materials. Lives in a modest apartment in Itaewon with the children, Kojo, Sani, and Malik. No father listed on any documentation. Rowoon's hands clenched into fists. Ages: 4 years, 3 months. The timeline fit perfectly. Yemi would have discovered the pregnancy just after he'd chosen his family's path over their relationship, after he'd said words designed to sever their connection cleanly enough that she'd never return. Words that had protected her from his world but destroyed them both. Financial situation?
Minjun's expression darkened.
Unstable. Behind on rent. Medical bills from the children's birth still outstanding. And there's something else. A social services investigation was opened 3 days ago. Someone reported concerns about the children's living environment and alleged exposure to criminal elements. White-hot fury flooded Rowoon's system, followed immediately by ice-cold calculation. Who filed the report?
Bradley.
But the timing.
Minjun hesitated.
The report was filed the day after you were seen at the park. Someone's watching, boss. His family. They'd seen the children, recognized the threat they represented to carefully laid plans. And now they were using bureaucratic weapons to eliminate the problem. Rowoon stared at the tablet displaying Yemi's information. Her modest apartment, her struggling business, the 3 children whose faces he could now see clearly in supplementary photos Minjun had obtained. Kojo with his serious expression. Sani with her bright curiosity. Malik with his careful precision. His children, living in danger because of who he was. Boss. Minjun's voice carried careful neutrality. What are your orders? Rowoon was silent for a long moment, watching dawn break over Seoul, a city he'd been raised to control but had never truly lived in. He thought of Jihoon, elegant and appropriate and completely wrong. Thought of his father's expectations, generations of legacy built on blood and silence. Thought of the life he'd been engineered to lead. Then he thought of 3 children in yellow shirts, swinging their legs in unison. Thought of Yemi's eyes across the park. Not angry, just carefully guarded. Thought of the man he'd been before ambition had calcified into identity. I'm going to fix this, he said finally, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even him. And Miss Jihoon? The engagement? Your family? Rowoon stood, moving to the window where Seoul sprawled beneath him like a chessboard he no longer wanted to play. For the first time in 4 years, he knew exactly what needed to be done. But how did they get here? What happened 4 years ago that made Yemi disappear with his children? If you want to know the love story that started this whole mess, and trust me, it's intense, make sure you're subscribed because what you're about to know about the relationship they had in the past will shock you. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss when Rowoon and Yemi first met, and why their love was doomed from the start. And Miss Jihoon? The engagement? Your family? Rowoon stood, moving to the window where Seoul sprawled beneath him like a chessboard he no longer wanted to play. For the first time in 4 years, he knew exactly what needed to be done. But what Rowoon didn't know was that fixing this would require destroying everything he'd ever built, and that Yemi had spent 4 years building walls he might never break through. That night, Rowoon didn't sleep. He sat in his study as the city lights blurred into dawn, his mind trapped in an endless loop. 3 children in yellow shirts, Yemi's face draining of color, the mathematical certainty of what he'd lost. At 3 a.m., he made the call.
Minjun.
I need information. Quietly. No surveillance that traces back to me. No pressure, no contact. Just facts. By sunrise, the file arrived. Rowoon's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The first physical evidence of vulnerability he'd shown in years. Yemi Adekunnal. Age 29. Single mother. The words felt like accusations. Children, Kojo 4, Sani 4, Malik 4. Triplets. No father listed on birth certificates. His children. 3 lives he should have known, should have protected, should have held. Current residence. 1-bedroom apartment. Itaewon. Income. Modest online textile business. Financial status. Unstable. Behind on rent. Medical debt from complicated birth still outstanding. Rowoon's jaw clenched. She'd been struggling. Alone. While he'd been planning engagement ceremonies and consolidating power. The next line made his blood freeze. Recent development. Social Services investigation opened 3 days ago. Anonymous report alleging unsafe living conditions and exposure to criminal elements. His family. They'd found her. Found the children. And now they were using bureaucratic weapons to eliminate what they saw as a threat to their carefully constructed future. Rowoon closed the file, but he couldn't close his mind. Memories he'd buried for 4 years clawed their way to the surface with surgical precision. Yemi laughing in his kitchen. Her voice filling spaces that had never known warmth. You can't seriously believe the ends justify the means, Rowoon. That's what tyrants tell themselves before they become monsters. I'm protecting people, he'd argued. My family keeps order in chaos. Your family creates the chaos, then sells protection from it. That's not order, that's extortion dressed in philosophy. She'd been the only person who dared to challenge him, who saw through the carefully constructed image to the man underneath, who asked him what he wanted instead of what he was supposed to want. Another memory, sharper, more painful. Yemi's voice breaking. I love you, but I can't watch you become the thing you're afraid of. I can't stand beside you while you make choices that destroy your soul. Then leave, he'd said coldly, wielding cruelty like a scalpel. I don't need someone questioning every decision. My family comes first. My responsibility comes first. If you can't accept that, there's nothing more to discuss. The devastation in her eyes had nearly broken his resolve. But he'd held firm, watched her walk away, convinced himself it was necessary. He'd chosen duty, chosen legacy, chosen the path his family had laid out since birth. He'd never known she was pregnant. The realization hit him with crushing force. Yemi hadn't disappeared to punish him. She'd disappeared because he'd taught her that she had no place in his world, that love was secondary to power, that she would always lose to family obligation. She'd taken his words seriously, protected herself, protected their children from a life where they'd always be leverage, always be vulnerabilities, always be pawns in someone else's game. She hadn't been cruel. She'd been smart. And he'd driven her to it with words designed to cut so deep she'd never come back. The guilt felt like drowning. For years, Rowoon had told himself that emotional detachment was strength, that love was a weakness enemies exploited, that his family's way, calculated, controlled, ruthless, was the only way to survive in their world. But sitting alone in his study with evidence of 3 children who'd grown up without knowing their father, he understood something new. He hadn't been strong. He'd been a coward, strong enough to control an empire, but too afraid to fight for the woman who'd seen his humanity beneath the armor. The first real crack appeared in the belief system he'd built his entire identity around. What good was power if it cost you everything that made life worth living? What was legacy if you had no one you truly loved to leave it to? What was control if you couldn't control the one thing that mattered, your own capacity for connection? Rowoon stood abruptly, his decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. He couldn't undo the past, couldn't erase the words that had driven Yemi away, couldn't give his children back the 4 years they'd lived without him. But he could stop hiding behind investigators and surveillance. He could face her, not as the untouchable heir to a criminal empire, as the man who'd made the worst mistake of his life and was finally brave enough to admit it. Minjun appeared in the doorway, reading the shift in Rowoon's posture. Boss, find out where she'll be tomorrow, Rowoon said quietly. Somewhere public. Somewhere she'll feel safe. And then, Rowoon picked up the file, evidence of 4 years of consequences, and met his associate's eyes. Then I stopped running from the only thing I've ever been truly afraid of.
Minjunes eyebrows rose.
Which is admitting I was wrong. For the first time in 4 years, Rowoon felt something other than the weight of duty. He felt terrified, and strangely, impossibly, alive. Rowoon found her 3 days later. Not through force or intimidation, he'd learned that much. Minjun had simply observed, documented patterns, reported locations. Nothing invasive. Nothing that would frighten her further. The community center sat in a quiet neighborhood in Itaewon, its walls covered in children's artwork and announcement flyers. Families streamed in and out, carrying backpacks and lunchboxes, living ordinary lives that felt impossibly distant from Rowoon's world. Yemi stood outside, arms crossed, watching the children play in a small courtyard behind a chain-link fence. Kojo, Sani, and Malik chased each other in circles, their laughter carrying across the afternoon air like evidence of a life Rowoon had never touched. She saw him approach. Didn't run this time. Just watched him with the careful guardedness of someone who'd learned to assess threats before they materialized. "I wondered how long it would take," she said calmly when he stopped a respectful distance away. Rowoon's throat felt tight. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the worry lines that hadn't existed 4 years ago. Evidence of struggles he should have shared. "They're mine," he said. Not a question, not a demand, just a truth that needed to be spoken aloud. "Yes." Yemi's voice carried no triumph, no vindication, just flat acknowledgement. "They are." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt impossibly heavy. "You didn't tell me," Rowoon said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Yemi turned to face him fully, her eyes holding emotions he couldn't name. "You made it very clear I had no place in your life, Rowoon. I respected that decision." The memory of his own words, cold, calculated, designed to sever, crashed through him like physical pain. "I didn't know you were pregnant. Would it have mattered?" Her question cut deeper than any accusation. "If I told you that night, would you have chosen differently? Or would I have just become another obligation in a life already suffocated by duty?" Rowoon opened his mouth, closed it. The silence stretched between them like an abyss. He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe he would have fought for her, for them, for the family they could have been. But standing in the afternoon light with 4 years of choices weighing on his conscience, he couldn't make that promise retroactively. Because the truth, brutal and undeniable, was that he didn't know. The man he'd been 4 years ago might have seen children as leverage, as complications, as vulnerabilities his enemies could exploit. That silence told Yemi everything she needed to know. "That's what I thought," she said quietly, something like grief flickering across her face before she controlled it. Behind the fence, Kojo had stopped playing. The boy stood perfectly still, watching Rowoon with unsettling intensity, those sharp, observant eyes cataloging every detail like a miniature detective. It was like looking in a mirror across time. "Mama," Kojo called out, his voice carrying a caution that no 4-year-old should possess. "Who is that man?" Yemi's jaw tightened. "Just someone Mama used to know, baby. Keep playing." But Kojo didn't move. Neither did Sani, who'd gravitated protectively toward her brother. Malik watched from behind them, his small head tilted in that precise gesture Rowoon made when calculating odds. They knew. On some instinctive level, they recognized something in him. And it terrified them. The realization struck Rowoon like a blade between ribs. His mere presence was a threat. Not because he wanted to harm them, but because of what his presence represented. The world he came from. The danger that followed his name like a shadow. "The social services investigation," Rowoon said quietly. "That was my family, wasn't it?" Yemi's expression hardened. 3 days after you saw us in the park, someone filed an anonymous report alleging the children were being exposed to criminal elements. Funny timing, don't you think? White-hot fury and ice-cold fear collided in Rowoon's chest. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I would never, but they would." Yemi's voice carried exhausted certainty. "This is exactly why I left, Rowoon. Not because I stopped loving you. Because loving you made my children targets. Because being connected to you meant they'd never be safe." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper so the children wouldn't hear. "You want to be their father?" Then tell me honestly, can you protect them from your own family? Can you promise me that knowing you won't destroy everything I've built to keep them safe? Rowoon stared at the children behind the fence. Kojo still watching him with unnerving recognition. Sani holding her brother's hands protectively. Malik's small face serious beyond his years. His children, living proof that love wasn't weakness. It was the most dangerous vulnerability of all. I don't know, he finally admitted, the words tasting like surrender. But I'm going to find out. Yemi studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Be careful what you're willing to destroy to find that answer, she said softly. Because once you start, there's no going back. She turned and walked toward the children, gathering them with gentle efficiency, shepherding them toward the community center door. Kojo looked back once, those sharp eyes meeting Rowoon's across the distance, before disappearing inside. Rowoon stood alone in the afternoon light, understanding with crushing clarity that he'd arrived at an impossible crossroads. He couldn't protect his children from his family's world without leaving it. And leaving it might cost him everything he'd ever known. The question wasn't whether he had the power to fix this. It was whether he had the courage to destroy himself in order to save them. The hardest thing Rowoon had ever done wasn't taking control of a criminal empire. It was sitting on a park bench 50 meters away from his children and doing nothing. For 2 weeks, he became a ghost in their lives, present but invisible, watching from carefully calculated distances. The playground near their apartment, the community center courtyard, the small grocery store where Yemi shopped on Thursday afternoons. He learned them the way he'd once learned enemy territories, through patient observation and careful notation. Kojo was serious beyond his years, always watching, always assessing. He lined up toys with geometric precision and asked questions that revealed an unsettling awareness of the world's dangers. When another child pushed Malik, Kojo didn't cry or fight. He simply positioned himself between his brother and the threat, small shoulders squared like a miniature soldier. Rowoon recognized himself in every gesture. Sani was pure curiosity wrapped in fearlessness. She asked endless questions: why birds flew, how clouds formed, where the sun went at night. She collected rocks and leaves and interesting trash, her pockets always full of treasures only she understood. When she laughed, it sounded like hope. Malik created order from chaos. He organized blocks by color, counted everything compulsively, and became genuinely distressed when routines changed. But when he concentrated, tongue poking out slightly, head tilted precisely, Rowoon saw his own calculating mind reflected in miniature. They were extraordinary, and he was a stranger watching through glass. Yemi knew he was there. She never acknowledged him directly, but sometimes she'd glance in his direction. Not with anger, but with weary resignation. Her boundaries were clear. Observe if you must, but don't approach. Don't disrupt. Don't claim what you abandoned. The restraint nearly killed him. Every instinct screamed to walk over, introduce himself, demand his place in their lives. But he'd learned enough about love to understand that his wants didn't matter here. Only their safety. Only their stability. Only what Yemi had built without him. You've been distracted. Jihoon's voice cut through his thoughts like surgical steel. They sat in an expensive restaurant, discussing final wedding arrangements, and Rowoon couldn't remember a single thing she'd said for the past 20 minutes. Business complications, he said automatically. For 2 weeks, her perfectly manicured fingers drummed the table. Your father is asking questions, Rowoon. Your brothers notice your absences. People are starting to wonder if you're having doubts about. She gestured delicately at the space between them. This arrangement. Rowoon's phone buzzed. Minyum. He ignored it. I'm not having doubts, he lied smoothly. Just handling something sensitive. Jihoon's eyes narrowed with the intelligence he'd always respected but never loved. Sensitive enough that you disappear for hours without explanation? Sensitive enough that you look at me like I'm a stranger?
Yihoon.
I'm not stupid, Rowoon. Whatever this is, handle it quickly. Our families have invested too much in this alliance for you to develop a conscience now. The cruelty in her casual dismissal of his humanity should have angered him. Instead, it clarified everything. This was the life he'd chosen, the cage he'd built, the future that required him to sacrifice anything resembling authentic feeling. His phone buzzed again, then again. "Excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. Outside the restaurant, he opened Minjun's messages. "Boss, we have a problem. Anonymous report filed with social services today. Allegations. Mother's romantic involvement with known criminal figure. Children at risk of exposure to organized crime activity. Investigation escalated. Surprise home visit scheduled for tomorrow morning." Rowoon's blood turned to ice. His family hadn't been satisfied with the first warning shot. Now they were weaponizing his mere existence against Yemi and the children. Being near them wasn't just insufficient. It was actively dangerous. A second message arrived. "Your father's assistant made 3 calls to social services office yesterday. Company lawyer present during filing process." This came from the top. Rowoon stared at his phone, watching his worst fears crystallize into undeniable truth. His father knew about the children, and he was systematically eliminating them as threats, not through violence but through bureaucratic destruction. Taking away the children through legal channels. Destroying Yemi's credibility as a mother. Forcing her to choose between her children's safety and any connection to Rowoon. It was elegant, ruthless, exactly what Rowoon himself would have done 5 years ago. The realization made him sick. He called Minjun immediately. "How much time do we have?" "Home visit is 9 a.m. tomorrow. If they find anything questionable, overcrowding, financial instability, any hint of criminal association, they can remove the children immediately pending investigation." Rowoon's mind raced through scenarios, calculating odds, identifying leverage points, then stopped, because every solution he could imagine, using his influence, pressuring officials, making the investigation disappear, would only prove his family's point, would only confirm that the children were connected to criminal power, would only make everything worse. For the first time in his life, Rowoon's power was the problem, not the solution. "Boss, what are your orders?" Rowoon looked back through the restaurant window at Jihoon, at the life he'd been bred to lead, at the empire built on control and calculated cruelty. Then he thought of 3 children in yellow shirts who deserved better than a father who brought danger instead of protection. "I'll handle it," he said quietly, but he had no idea how. And tomorrow morning, his family would force him to choose between the children he'd just discovered and the only world he'd ever known. The social worker arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Rowoon knew because he'd been parked 3 blocks away since dawn, watching Yemi's building with the helpless intensity of someone who'd built an empire on control and now had none. Ms. Park was professional, polite, and absolutely thorough. Rowoon couldn't see inside the apartment, but Minjun had briefed him on standard procedures. Inspection of living conditions, interviews with the mother, observation of the children, questions designed to seem casual but structured to reveal vulnerabilities. The visit lasted 2 hours. When Ms. Park finally emerged, her expression was carefully neutral, which meant she'd found something worth noting. Rowoon's phone rang immediately. "The apartment is too small for 4 people," Minjun reported, his voice tense. 1 bedroom. Children sleeping on a fold-out couch in the main room. Not illegal, but concerning when combined with financial instability. Ms. Park asked about the father. Yemi said there was no father involved. Ms. Park asked if any men had been around the children recently. Yemi said no. Rowoon's jaw clenched. She'd lied to protect him. To protect all of them. What's the assessment? Inconclusive. They're opening a full investigation. Follow-up visits scheduled. If they find any evidence of criminal association or financial desperation that might compromise the children's welfare. Minjun didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rowoon waited until evening, until the children were asleep, before approaching Yemi's building. She answered on the second knock, unsurprised to find him there. "You heard," she said flatly. "Let me help. I can make this disappear." "With what?" Yemi's laugh was brittle. "Your money? Your influence? Every solution you have proves their point, Rowoon. The moment I accept anything from you, I confirm that my children are connected to organized crime. So you'll just let them take the children? They won't take my children. Her voice carried absolute certainty, but her eyes betrayed her fear. I'll get a second job. Move to a bigger apartment. Prove I can provide. You can barely keep up with rent now. The words came out harsher than he intended. Yemi's expression hardened. I've managed for 4 years without you. I'll manage now. Yemi.
No.
She stepped closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. You don't understand what's happening here. This isn't about whether I'm a good mother. This is about control. Your family sees my children as a threat to their perfect future for you, and they're using the system to eliminate that threat. Every move you make, every time you're seen near us, you give them more ammunition. Rowoon's hands clenched into fists. So what am I supposed to do? Just walk away? Yes. The word fell between them like a death sentence. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Silence stretched taut as a wire. I can't, Rowoon said hoarsely. You have to. Yemi's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. Because they're not just using the children to control you, Rowoon. They're using you to control the children. As long as you're in our lives, we're vulnerable. As long as you're connected to that world, my babies are leverage. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. His presence wasn't protection. It was a target painted on their backs. There has to be another way, he said desperately. Yemi studied him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried exhausted resignation. There is, but it requires you to do something you've never done before. What? Choose. Not between me and your family, that choice was made 4 years ago. Choose between the power you've inherited and the life you could actually live. Between the empire that defines you and the children who need a father, not a crime lord. Rowoon stared at her, his mind reeling. You're asking me to walk away from everything. I'm asking you to walk toward something, Yemi corrected softly. But only if you actually want it. Because I won't let my children grow up as bargaining chips in your family's power games. I won't let them become leverage to keep you obedient. If you can't leave that world completely, not just physically but structurally, legally, permanently, then you need to stay away from us. The ultimatum hung between them, absolute and unavoidable. Rowoon thought of his father's legacy, generations of carefully built influence, the weight of expectations he'd carried since birth. Thought of Jihoon waiting for him to return to their carefully arranged future. Thought of his brothers, his associates, the empire that would crumble without his leadership. Then he thought of Kojo's serious eyes, Sani's fearless curiosity, Malik's careful precision. 3 children who deserved a father brave enough to choose them. I need time, he said finally. You don't have time. Yemi's voice broke slightly. The investigation escalates every day you're connected to us. The follow-up visit is next week. If they find any evidence of criminal association, they won't. How can you promise that when your family is the one manufacturing the evidence? Rowoon had no answer, because she was right. His family would keep attacking until they'd systematically destroyed any possibility of connection. Would keep using bureaucratic weapons until Yemi had no choice but to flee or surrender the children to foster care. Unless he removed himself as a variable. Unless he severed the connection so completely, so publicly, so irrevocably that his family had no reason to target Yemi and the children anymore. If I do this, he said slowly, if I walk away from everything, there's no going back. My family doesn't accept resignations. They view leaving as betrayal. I know. Yemi's eyes held something like grief. I'm asking you to choose between the life you were born into and the life you could have. Between legacy and love. Between power and freedom. She stepped back toward her door. But I need to know you're choosing us because you actually want to, not because you feel obligated. Those children deserve a father who chose them, not one who resented them for costing him an empire. The door closed softly, leaving Rowoon alone in the hallway. Above him, through thin walls, he could hear one of the children stirring. A small voice asking for water, Yemi's gentle response. The sound of a family he'd never been part of. A family that would only be safe if he was willing to destroy everything he'd ever been. Rowoon sat in his father's study at 2 a.m., staring at the family portrait that had hung there for 3 generations. Men in expensive suits. Women with practiced smiles. Children groomed to inherit empires built on blood and silence. A legacy of power that demanded everything and gave back nothing but control. He'd spent his entire life trying to earn a place in that portrait. Now he was about to burn it down. The realization had come slowly, then all at once. Like waking from a dream he'd mistaken for reality. For years, he'd told himself that power required sacrifice. That love was weakness. That emotional detachment was strength. That his family's way, calculated, controlled, ruthless, was the only way to survive. But sitting in the darkness with the weight of 3 children's futures pressing against his chest, he understood something he'd been too afraid to see. Love had never been his weakness. Fear had. Fear of disappointing his father. Fear of failing the legacy. Fear of being ordinary, vulnerable, human. Fear of admitting that the empire he'd inherited wasn't worth the cost of his soul. He'd been terrified of love because love required something power never did. The courage to choose truth over control. The courage to be seen completely and accept the risk of rejection. The courage to value connection over dominance. And he'd spent 4 years calling that fear duty. Rowoon opened his laptop and began to type. The resignation letter was brutally simple. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from all operational and leadership roles within the organization. I am transferring my shares and assets to the family trust and severing all formal ties. This decision is final and non-negotiable. He sent it at dawn, then made 3 phone calls that would detonate his entire world. First, to the prosecutors his family had spent decades bribing and manipulating. He arranged a meeting, offered cooperation, named names, detailed operations, provided documentation that would dismantle the syndicate's legal protections. Second, to his family's financial network. He transferred every asset under his control, properties, accounts, holdings, into trusts that legally excluded him, made himself worthless as leverage. Third, to Ji-hoon. The engagement is over, he said simply.
I'm sorry.
Her silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Your father will destroy you for this. I know. Was it worth it? Not cruel, genuinely curious. Rowoon thought of 3 children in yellow shirts. Yes. She hung up without another word. The fallout was immediate and surgical. His father called at 7 a.m. Didn't yell, that would have implied emotion. Simply stated facts with the cold efficiency of a man severing a limb. You are no longer my son. Your name will be removed from all family records. Any attempt to contact family members will be treated as a threat. You have 48 hours to remove your belongings from the apartment. After that, you'll be considered a stranger. An enemy. I understand, Rowoon said. Do you? His father's voice carried something almost like curiosity. Do you understand that you've traded generations of power for nothing? That she'll never trust you? That those children will never really be yours? Maybe, Rowoon admitted. But at least I'll be able to look at them without seeing leverage. Without calculating their value as assets. Without teaching them that love is something you sacrifice for ambition. His father laughed. A sound without humor. You always were too sentimental. It made you weak. No, Rowoon said quietly. It made me human. The line went dead. The threats started within hours. Anonymous calls. Warnings from old associates. Veiled suggestions that accidents happen to traitors. His apartment was vandalized. His car was sabotaged. Former allies crossed the street to avoid acknowledging him. Rowoon had expected violence. What surprised him was the silence. His family didn't send enforcers. Didn't orchestrate dramatic revenge. Simply erased him. Removed him from their world so completely it was as if he'd never existed. The message was clear, you're dead to us. And strangely, it felt like freedom. Minjun found him 3 days later in a modest hotel room, looking more exhausted than Rowoon had ever seen him. The prosecution accepted your cooperation, he reported. They're building cases. It'll take months, but the organization's legal protection is compromised. Your father knows this. He's adapting. And the social services investigation? Minjun's expression shifted, something almost like hope. The anonymous complaints stopped. The follow-up visit happened yesterday. Ms. Park noted improved financial stability. Someone anonymously paid Yemi's outstanding debts and 3 months' rent in advance. The case is being recommended for closure. Rowoon's throat tightened. Someone. He knew who. His mother, perhaps. Or Minjun himself. Small rebellions from people who'd watched him choose courage over comfort. And Yemi, she knows what you did. The resignation made news in certain circles. She knows you walked away. Does she believe it?
Minjun considered carefully.
She's waiting, watching to see if you meant it, if you can actually exist outside that world. Rowoon nodded slowly. He didn't expect forgiveness. Didn't expect Yemi to simply welcome him back after 4 years of absence and 2 weeks of chaos. But he'd done the one thing he'd never been capable of before. He'd chosen truth over power, chosen vulnerability over control, chosen the possibility of love over the certainty of legacy. What now, boss? Minjun asked, then caught himself.
Sorry.
What now, Rowoon? Rowoon looked out the window at Seoul spreading beneath him. A city he no longer controlled, no longer needed to control. Now, he said quietly, I learn how to be the kind of man who deserves to be their father. Not because of power or obligation, but because I chose them. Completely. Finally. Without reservation. And if she doesn't let you in? Then I wait, Rowoon said simply, and prove through action what words could never accomplish. For the first time in 4 years, maybe in his entire life, Rowoon felt like himself. Not an heir. Not a crime lord. Not a strategist calculating odds. Just a man who'd finally been brave enough to walk away from everything he'd never really wanted. And walk toward the only thing that had ever truly mattered. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. The case is closed. The children are safe. What you did. I see it. Rowoon stared at the message, something breaking open in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. And for now, that was enough. The first week without power felt like learning to breathe underwater. Rowoon moved into a small apartment in Hongdae. 2 rooms, modest furniture, walls thin enough to hear neighbors' conversations. No security detail, no driver, no network of associates monitoring threats. Just him, a coffee maker that he didn't know how to use, and the strange, disorienting freedom of irrelevance. He bought groceries, rode the subway, waited in line at the bank like everyone else. Small acts that felt monumental after a lifetime of having everything arranged, controlled, provided. The first time someone bumped into him without apologizing, without even recognizing who he'd been, Rowoon nearly laughed. He was nobody now. It was terrifying, liberating, real. Yemi watched from a distance at first. Not obviously, she was too careful for that. But Rowoon noticed her near the community center, observed her observing him, saw her casual questions to Minjun, who'd quietly remained loyal despite everything. She was checking, verifying, making sure his resignation wasn't performance or manipulation, making sure he'd actually meant it. He didn't approach, didn't push, just existed in the same spaces, the park, the grocery store, the playground, and let his presence speak for itself. I'm here.
I'm staying.
I'm not going anywhere. After 2 weeks, she finally spoke to him. You look different, she said, appearing beside him on a bench while the children played in the distance. Rowoon glanced down at his simple clothes, the absence of designer labels and power suits. I am different. I meant your face. Yemi studied him carefully. You look lighter, like you're not carrying something invisible anymore. He considered that. Maybe I'm not. Silence settled between them, not hostile but not comfortable either. The weight of 4 years and countless unspoken truths. The case is really closed? Rowoon asked finally. Yes, Ms. Park called yesterday. Said there were no concerns, no evidence of unsafe conditions or criminal associations. Recommended case closure with no follow-up required. Good. Your family's complaints stopped completely. Yemi's voice carried careful neutrality, almost like someone removed their reason for targeting us. Rowoon met her eyes. Almost. Another silence. Then, quietly, "What you did, walking away from everything. I see it, Rowoon. I'm not ready to trust it yet. But I see it. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. And it felt like oxygen." The children's warming was slower, more cautious. Kojo watched Rowoon with that unsettling intensity, analyzing every gesture, every word. He didn't approach, but he stopped positioning himself protectively between Rowoon and his siblings. Small progress. Sani was curiosity incarnate. One afternoon, she wandered over while Rowoon sat reading on a bench. "Why do you come here every day?" she asked bluntly. "Because your mother brings you here," Rowoon answered honestly. "Why do you want to see us?" The question cut deeper than she knew. Rowoon set down his book, choosing words carefully. "Because I made mistakes, big ones, and I'm trying to learn how to do better." Sani considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. "Mama says mistakes are okay if you learn from them. Your mama is very wise. Are you learning?" "I'm trying." Sani nodded, apparently satisfied, and ran back to her brothers. That night, Yemi texted him. "She told me you said I was wise. That's the first time you've complimented me without wanting something in return." Rowoon stared at the message, realizing how transactional he'd been even in love, how every word had carried calculation, every gesture served strategy. "I'm learning that too," he typed back. "How to just be, without agenda. Keep learning." Malik was the breakthrough. The boy dropped his favorite toy, a small truck, and it rolled under a bench. He stood frozen, clearly distressed by the disruption to his order. Rowoon retrieved it without thinking, kneeling to the boy's eye level. "Here," he said gently, offering the truck. Malik took it, studying Rowoon with those calculating eyes. Then, carefully, deliberately, he held out his hand. Not for a handshake, not for comfort, to show Rowoon the other trucks in his collection, lined up by size and color with meticulous precision. Rowoon's throat tightened. "That's very organized," he managed. Malik nodded seriously. "Everything has its place." "Yes," Rowoon agreed softly. "It does." The boy sat beside him for exactly 3 minutes, arranging and rearranging his trucks, before returning to his brothers. But it was 3 minutes more than Rowoon had dared hope for. Over the following weeks, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with declarations or apologies or grand gestures. Just small moments that accumulated like snowfall. Yemi asking if he wanted coffee while she was getting some. Kojo nodding at him in acknowledgement instead of suspicion. Sani showing him a particularly interesting rock she'd found. Malik sitting near him while playing, comfortable with proximity. Rowoon learned humility in increments. Learned that being present mattered more than being powerful. Learned that his children didn't need a crime lord's protection. They needed a father's patience. Learned that Yemi was watching not his words, but his actions. Not his promises, but his consistency. One evening, as they watched the children play, Yemi spoke without looking at him. "I'm not forgiving you yet. I'm not sure I know how to. 4 years is a long time to build walls. I know, but I'm reconsidering what you walked away from, what you chose instead, what you're trying to become." Rowoon's heart hammered. And I think maybe you're finally becoming the man I thought I saw 4 years ago, before fear made you someone else. She stood, gathering her things to collect the children. "There's a community event at the park on Sunday. 3 o'clock. The children will be there." She paused, something vulnerable flickering in her expression. "If you want to come, not as someone watching from a distance, but as someone who might eventually belong, you're welcome." Before Rowoon could respond, she walked away. But her words echoed in the space she'd left behind. Eventually belong. Not a promise, not forgiveness, but an invitation to step out of the shadows and into the possibility of family. Sunday, 3 o'clock, the park where everything had shattered. Maybe the same place where everything could begin again. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a gift or a test. Rowoon arrived at the park 15 minutes early, standing at the entrance like someone awaiting judgment. His hands were empty. No gifts, no grand gestures. Just him, in jeans and a plain shirt, looking more uncertain than he'd felt negotiating with prosecutors or walking away from an empire. Yemi appeared at exactly 3 o'clock, the children trailing behind her like ducklings. She spotted him immediately, her expression unreadable. For one suspended moment, he thought she might turn around. Then she nodded toward the bench beneath the jacaranda tree. The same bench where his world had fractured 8 weeks ago. They walked toward it in silence, the children running ahead to the playground. Kojo glanced back once, always checking, before joining his siblings. Yemi sat first. Rowoon followed, leaving careful space between them. "You came," she said quietly. "You invited me. I also expected you might not show. That this would be the moment you realized how hard the work actually is." Rowoon watched Malik organizing sticks by length, Sani climbing with fearless determination, Kojo standing guard near the slide. His children, still strangers in so many ways but undeniably his. "The hardest thing I've ever done," he said slowly, "wasn't walking away from power. It was sitting here every day afterward, watching them, knowing I had no right to approach. Knowing I'd destroyed my chance before I even knew they existed." Yemi was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you really do it? Walk away from everything?" "Because..." Rowoon stopped, forcing himself toward truth instead of strategy. "Because I spent 4 years believing I'd made the right choice. That duty mattered more than love. That power was worth the cost of my humanity. Then I saw them, and I understood I'd been lying to myself. About what? About what actually matters?" He turned to face her. "I told myself love was weakness, that emotional attachment made you vulnerable, that the only way to survive was to choose legacy over connection. But the truth is, I was just afraid." "Of what?" "Of being ordinary, of being seen completely and maybe not being enough, of loving someone so much they could destroy me just by leaving." His voice roughened. "So I destroyed us first, called it duty, called it sacrifice, called it anything but what it really was, cowardice dressed up as strength." Yemi's breath caught slightly, but she didn't look away. "I can't undo 4 years," Rowoon continued. "Can't give back what I took from you. The pregnancy alone, the births, the sleepless nights, the fear. I can't erase the words I said or the choice I made. But I can finally be honest about what I was and what I'm trying to become. Which is someone worthy of them. Not because of what I can provide or protect against, but because I chose them over everything else. Because I'm learning that being present matters more than being powerful. That love isn't something you calculate. It's something you surrender to." Sani's laughter carried across the playground. Kojo was pushing her on a swing, his serious face showing hints of a smile. Malik sat in the sand, constructing something with architectural precision. "They're extraordinary," Rowoon said softly, "and they got that from you. Your strength, your courage, your refusal to compromise their safety even when it cost you everything." "They have your stubbornness," Yemi replied, something almost like amusement in her voice. "Your intensity. Kojo calculates odds like you do. Malik needs order the way you do. Sani asks questions until she understands completely, just like you used to." "Used to? You've changed." She studied him carefully. "You're quieter now, less certain, more human. Is that good?" "It's honest." Yemi paused. "I don't forgive you yet, Rowoon. I'm not sure how to. You broke something fundamental when you chose duty over us. Taught me I couldn't trust you when things got difficult." The words stung, but he'd earned them. "I know. But..." She took a breath. "But I'm starting to believe you might actually mean it this time. That you didn't walk away from power to manipulate me or win me back. You walked away because you finally understood what mattered. I do understand. Finally. Then understand this too. I won't let my children grow up watching me settle for someone who chose them out of guilt or obligation. If you're here because you feel responsible, walk away now. But if you're here because you genuinely want this life, the messy, ordinary, unglamorous reality of parenting and partnership, then maybe, eventually, we can find a way forward. Rowoon met her eyes. I want this. Not the fantasy of it. Not the idea of redemption. The sticky hands and endless questions and 2 a.m. worries. The ordinary magic of watching them grow. The privilege of standing beside you while you do the hardest work in the world. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile is. They might never fully trust you. Then I'll spend however long it takes earning that trust. One day at a time. Yemi studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Not forgiveness. Not promises. Just, okay. You can be here. You can be present. You can try. Relief crashed through him so powerfully he almost couldn't breathe. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Yemi said with a hint of dry humor. Wait until you've survived a full day with 3 4-year-olds. Across the playground, Malik looked up from his construction project and waved. Small, tentative, but unmistakable. Rowoon waved back, his throat tight. He was no longer a king. No longer an heir to criminal legacy. No longer the untouchable strategist who controlled Seoul's underworld. He was just a man on a park bench, learning how to be a father. Learning how to be human. Learning that the truest power wasn't control. It was the courage to be vulnerable enough to love completely. Yemi stood, gathering her things. Come on. Sani wants to show everyone her rock collection, and apparently that includes you now. Rowoon followed her toward the children, toward the messy reality of family, toward a future built not on power but on presence. It wasn't resolution, but it was possibility. And for the first time in 4 years, that felt like everything. 3 months later, Rowoon learned that fatherhood was nothing like running an empire. Empires responded to strategy. Children responded to patience, consistency, and an inexhaustible tolerance for questions about why clouds moved and whether ants had feelings. But why can't we see air? Sani asked for the 7th time that morning. Her small hand sticky with juice as she gripped Rowoon's finger. They were walking to the community center, a Tuesday routine that had become sacred. Yemi worked mornings now that her business was stabilizing, and Rowoon had volunteered to help with the school run. Not because she needed him to, because he wanted to be there. Air is made of molecules that are too small for our eyes to see. Rowoon explained again, with the patience he'd never known he possessed. But we know it's there because we can feel it when we breathe. Can ants feel it? Probably. Do they think about it? I don't know, sweetheart. That's a very good question. Kojo walked beside them, quieter than his sister but always observing. He'd started asking Rowoon questions too, not about science but about choices, about why people did bad things, about whether someone could change completely. Heavy questions for a 4-year-old who'd learned too early that the world wasn't always safe. Malik held Rowoon's other hand, counting cracks in the sidewalk with single-minded focus. 17, 18, 19. You're very good at counting, Rowoon said. 20, 21. Malik didn't break concentration, but his grip tightened slightly. A small gesture that meant everything. The integration had been gradual, almost invisible. Not a dramatic reunion or tearful reconciliation. Just accumulated moments that built trust one interaction at a time. Rowoon showing up consistently. Never promising more than he could deliver. Never pushing faster than Yemi allowed. Learning to change diapers when Sani had an accident. Reading the same bedtime story 17 nights in a row because Malik needed routine. Sitting quietly while Kojo worked through big feelings he didn't have words for yet. The unglamorous, exhausting, magnificent work of showing up. Yemi had maintained firm boundaries. She still lived in her apartment, larger now with 2 bedrooms but distinctly hers. Made her own decisions about the children's schedules, their education, their lives. accepted Rowoon's presence but never his control. "I'm not your wife," she told him clearly one evening. "I'm not even your partner yet. I'm a woman raising 3 children who's allowing their father to be present. That's what this is right now. I know. And you're okay with that? I'm grateful for it." She'd studied him carefully, as if checking for resentment or manipulation. Found only honesty. Okay then. The shift happened so gradually Rowoon almost missed it. One Sunday, Yemi invited him to stay for dinner. Not a special occasion, just spaghetti and chaos and 3 children talking over each other while sauce dripped everywhere. It was the most beautiful meal Rowoon had ever experienced. Another evening, Kojo had a nightmare. Ran to Yemi first, always first, but when she'd soothed him and carried him back to bed, the boy had looked at Rowoon standing in the doorway. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Rowoon had sat beside the small bed, humming softly, until Kojo's breathing steadied into sleep. When he'd emerged, Yemi was waiting in the hallway. "He's never asked anyone else to do that," she said quietly. "Just me."
I'm honored.
"You should be." Her voice carried weight. "He doesn't trust easily. None of them do. But they're learning that you're safe. That you mean what you say. That you're not going anywhere. I'm not." Yemi stepped closer, her expression complex. "I know. I'm starting to trust that too. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way it had been before. But it was something more honest. More earned. Something built on choice instead of chemistry. On action instead of words." 6 months after the park, Rowoon sat on Yemi's couch while the children played at his feet.
No designer suites.
No security detail. No empire to manage or enemies to calculate. Just him in worn jeans, building a block tower that Malik kept perfecting, answering Sani's endless questions, listening while Kojo explained the rules of a game only he understood. Ordinary, domestic, unglamorous, extraordinary. Yemi emerged from the kitchen, coffee in hand, and paused in the doorway. Something shifted in her expression, softness breaking through years of careful guardedness. "What?" Rowoon asked. "You look happy," she said, surprised. "Actually happy. Not performing it or strategizing it. Just content." Rowoon glanced at the children, at the organized chaos of family life, at the woman who'd been brave enough to disappear and strong enough to consider letting him return. "I am happy," he realized. "For the first time maybe ever, I actually am. Even without the power, the control, the empire. Because without it." He met her eyes. "I thought power made me strong. Thought control kept me safe. But all it did was make me a stranger to myself. This," he gestured at the ordinary scene around them. "This is what I was afraid of my whole life. Being ordinary. Being vulnerable. Being seen completely. And now I understand that was never weakness. It was the only thing worth having." Yemi sat beside him, not touching but close. "You know this doesn't erase what happened, right? The 4 years. The choice you made. The pain you caused. I know. And I'm still not sure if I can love you again. Not the way I did before. I know that too. But," she paused, choosing words carefully, "but I respect what you've become. The man who chose to walk away from everything. Who shows up every day without expecting anything in return. Who's learning to be a father instead of a protector. That man, I could maybe love that man. Eventually. Not a promise. Not a guarantee. But possibility grounded in truth. Eventually is enough," Rowoon said softly. Malik leaned against his leg, tired from playing. Sani showed him a drawing she'd made. Their family, she explained, though the figures were mostly scribbles. Kojo watched with cautious approval, his walls slowly, incrementally coming down. Outside the window, Seoul sprawled in the distance. A city Rowoon no longer controlled, no longer needed to control. He traded an empire for this. Sticky hands and endless questions and the privilege of ordinary Tuesdays. He'd surrendered power for presence, dominance for choice, legacy for love, and discovered that freedom wasn't loud or dramatic or wrapped in control. Freedom was quiet Sunday mornings. It was choosing to show up. It was being chosen in return. It was learning that the truest strength wasn't power over others. It was power over yourself. The courage to become someone worthy of love instead of demanding it through control. Rowoon had been a king. Now he was just a man, a father, a human being, finally completely free. And that was everything. If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.